Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this relaunch event and the launch event for the Goldsmith Immigration and Public Law team and the new Goldsmith Animal Rights teams. I wanted to thank you all very much for giving up your time to join us tonight. We have some great panelists, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy your evening. But first of all, I want to introduce you to a gentleman who's described in Chambers and Partners as a powerful advocate who has great client care skills, collaborative, helpful, always open to discussions, quick and incisive judgment calls, an outstanding jury advocate with unmatched cross-examination skills. He comes across as friendly and committed to both clients and jury members and easily wins their trusts. On a personal level, we all know him as someone who is kind, dedicated, extraordinarily hardworking, and very supportive of all of us at Goldsmith Chambers. He is our head of Chambers, Anthony Metzer QC.
Thank you, Jane. It's a very generous introduction. Can I also please first of all, welcome everyone. We're delighted to have such wonderful numbers attending. And I want to say a few thank yous, first of all. I want to thank the members of Chambers who have really put on what I think is going to be an absolutely wonderful launch. I'd like to specifically thank Sarah Pinder on my right, Samina Iqbal on my left, Jane yourself, Jane Haybrook, Fran Allen, who you'll be hearing from as well, Sana Safalahi, Pearl Yong, and all those who've behind our social media that have helped to advertise this event so successfully and so wonderfully. We are delighted to have this event. I'm personally thrilled that it's happening. It's an opportunity to celebrate successful new recruits into Chambers. These teams have recruited 7 new members of Chambers, and I'm going to mention them, 4 of which are from one Chambers: Amajit Sira, Sarah Anzani, Emma Harris, George Symes, and 3 other new recruits in order of recruit time: Jan Turfel, Ken Maguire, and very recently, Jamil Danji. We are delighted they've all come, and they are a sign, I believe, of how Chambers has thrived, let alone survived in these difficult times. It has been a time we've had to reflect about how to develop Chambers in the most successful and hopefully powerful way. And I think this evening wholly reflects that. The large and very successful immigration team has relaunched as an immigration and public law team. Many would say this is the absolutely apposite time to be doing that, with issues relating to public law so much under threat under this present government. And it is also very exciting to introduce a new team, an animal rights team, to be headed now by Fran in what will, I'm sure, be a extremely exciting way, and also, I believe, is the first Chambers that has such a team in existence. I'm also honoured and delighted to welcome our speakers this evening. Our first speaker is going to be Mr. Justice Mike Fordham. You will all know him as one of the leading public lawyers in this country. He was at Blackstone Chambers. He was appointed as a High Court judge this January. He previously had a very wide practice spanning civil liberties, environmental law and immigration, particularly focusing on EU and competition law. He represented claimants, defendants, interested parties, and his practice spanned the entire range of public law. And you will know, of course, that, and we will be mentioned this later, he is, of course, an author of the leading textbook in judicial review. He took silk in 2006. He was appointed a civil recorder in 2010, a criminal recorder in 2012, the same year he was appointed a deputy judge of the upper tribunal, where he sat for some 6 years, and was appointed a High Court judge under Section 9(1), a deputy High Court judge, back in 2012-13. And then, as I've indicated now, he's taken up full appointment as a High Court judge in January 2020. His loss to the bar undoubtedly is a benefit and a gain to the High Court. So he will speak, and we're also delighted that Mr. Kevin Schneider is speaking. He's the Executive Director of the Non-Human Rights Project in the United States. I think you'll hear a little bit more about him from Mike as well, and we're delighted that he is here too. And so without further ado, I hope you will all find it an enjoyable and a stimulating evening, and I shall now hand over to Mike.
Thanks very much. I'm speaking for all of us, and I can see how many of us there are because I've got a click, and we've just gone up by one. So we've got 101 at the moment. I'll be able to monitor that, and I'll be able to see if that dips, and I'll be able to see when it dips. But please stay with us, or at least pretend, just leave it on and go and make a cup of tea if you have to. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to tell you stuff from me. I'm going to ask questions on your behalf of these brilliant Goldsmith team leaders in these new visionary ventures. I hope I'm not understating anything. First of all, though, congratulations on your credits. I thought they were brilliant, and it was very stirring. It made me want to immediately leave my job and join your chambers. So that's really good. And I also think all hearings on Zoom or Teams should begin with similar credits and music. I think it would be very stirring if the legal teams had that sort of introduction before they get to see somebody like me. So I'll be taking that up with my boss. And also congratulations on your magnificent 7 new recruits. And I think you need a video of that as well. So I'm going to ask some questions, and here's the way it's going to work. When I introduce one of the Goldsmith Chambers team, I'm going to give you 2 facts about them, audience, and we've gone up. We're at 102. Brilliant. I'm not going to repeat anything though. I'm going to give you 2 facts and about each of them, and one of those facts will be true, and the other is a complete lie. And at the end, if you stay on, I will tell you which was the truth and which was the fiction about the Goldsmith team leaders. So let's start with Samina. And Samina, 2 facts, one of which is true. Samina skydived over a glacier in New Zealand, fact number 1, didn't you, Samina? And Samina also backpacked in Laos. So those are the 2 facts, one of which is true. And Samina, I want you, please, to tell our audience of 105, it's going up all the time, about the immigration part of your team, but please try to leave out the public law part of your team because that's a different question.
Thank you. I'm hoping everyone can hear me. Can you hear me? Yes. Great. Thank you. Well, just to tell you a bit about our team, historically, it's always been immigration, asylum, and nationality. The remit of our work has always been more extensive. We've seen appeal rights decreasing, but the nature of the decisions that we're challenging have been wider in their ambit and beyond pure immigration. Our clients are now subject to lots of checks, their tax checks, landlords, employers, schools and hospitals checking. So that's led to a sharpening of our own skills. It's made it easier whilst we've been part of this very multidisciplinary set. But all in all, our immigration team's quite versatile. Members go over and above to ensure accessible justice to all for those requiring assistance. And our team ethos is essentially justice for all. So that hopefully says it all. But that's our immigration team in a nutshell.
Well, brilliant. You nearly caught me out there. I had to unmute myself. Great. Well, then let's hear the other side of that from Sarah. And Sarah, here are 2 facts about Sarah. Sarah Pinder. So the first fact that is definitely true about Sarah Pinder is that she was born in South Africa. And the second fact that is also definitely true about Sarah is that she once chatted in German with Lewis Hamilton. So Sarah, I want to ask you, please, about the other side of that linked team. Tell us about the public law part of that team.
So the public law part of the team is segueing from what Samina just covered. We have started as an immigration team, and so we have, I think, come a long way if we also remind ourselves that there was no immigration team at Goldsmiths prior to November 2015. And for Samina and I as heads, but I think as a team as a whole, we have come to the point where we do want to build on the strengths that we've managed to achieve. We do want to continue growing and cement from obviously the achievements that we've reached so far. The timing, as Tony mentioned in his introduction, has coincided with COVID. So I think it's fair to say we have felt the increase in the hostile environment, the reach that those sorts of systems have had on the most vulnerable, and we've reached a crossroads in terms of progressing into these other areas. It's also very timely, I think, or we think, a Human Rights Act review announced yesterday. We obviously all know about the judicial review announced, the administrative law review announced. And so we are at a crossroads, whether we're applicant lawyers, government lawyers, whether we are activists or consider ourselves activist lawyers. All of these areas need furthering, and the timing's right to go into community care, to go into mental health in a more specialised way.
So I just want to follow up and ask you, if I was a team member at Goldsmith, and would I be either immigration or public, or would I necessarily be both of those? How does that work? Because your team is immigration and public. Is that because they all do all of that, or there's like a Venn diagram going on where there's an overlap in the middle? How does that work?
So at the moment, in terms of the immigration team, so the core initial immigration team, many from that team are crossing over into wider public law areas. But it has also allowed us to welcome new members as well. So both within chambers, existing members, so from other teams, crime team members that have perhaps started to practice in those areas, have been able to come up to join us in trying to further that. And as we see also, we'll see later with the crossovers in animal law and so forth. So it's a mixture of both, with very much the core immigration team branching out as well, but welcoming new members from both inside and out.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, just to update you, we've got 119 attendees. It's growing. For those who missed the credits, I'm really sorry you did, because they were fantastic at the start. But thank you for joining us. My name's Mike Fordham. I'm just asking some questions of the Goldsmith team leaders, and I'm trying to act as advocate, which I really miss because I used to do that. And I'm trying to act as advocate for the audience to ask some questions. So my next one's for you, Fran, and this is totally unscripted, as you will all appreciate. Nobody knows what question is going to be asked or of whom, but I'm going to choose you next, Fran. Francis Allen. Now, here are two facts about Francis Allen, and then I'm going to ask you, guess what? Shocking surprise. I'm going to ask you about the animal rights team, Fran. But before I do, here are your facts. So Fran once had a client who was a chimpanzee, fact number one. And secondly, Fran once tried, I emphasize tried, to climb Everest. So those are the two facts, one of which is true. Fran, why is this the right time for an animal rights team? And I'm sure Tony is right that you're the first in terms of Chambers animal rights teams, certainly the first I've heard of. But why now?
Well, so why now? I've been waiting for this moment since 1995. That was the year that I was called to the bar. When I was called in 1995, there was no body of professional animal rights lawyers. So in 1997, when I got tenancy, I was in chambers with a guy called Jeremy Chipperfield, who is also an associate member of Goldsmith Chambers. And we decided to set up a group. It originally was called Lawyers for Animal Welfare. It then morphed into the Association of Lawyers for Animal Welfare. And now, and due mainly to the work and dedication of Paula Sparks, it's now a charity called A-Law, the UK Centre for Animal Law. Now, going back to the time when Jeremy and I first started the group, we called for a meeting. We invited solicitors and barristers, but we had absolutely no idea whether or not anybody would turn up. And we were surprised to find that there were a lot of people, a lot of solicitors and a lot of barristers who did turn up for this meeting. Now, I can't remember now how many it was, but it was certainly significantly more than we had anticipated, such that Jeremy had to go out and get some more wine and crisps. But what we did learn, and I think this is the point, that one, there was interest, but two, that sometimes it just needs somebody to step forward and to just do it. Now, there's also been, I think, a great sea change recently with a growing awareness of our impact on the planet and on the animals with whom we share this world. And I also think that animal rights is now a social justice issue, which is gaining momentum within society. If we look at the Vegan Society figures, for example, in 2019, there was a 62% increase in the number of vegans within the UK. And all of us know from popping into a coffee shop, cafe, restaurant, pub, that being vegan now is mainstream. So wider society is getting there. And obviously, our laws have to reflect our society. Courts in other countries are taking the lead in this. There's a recent case in the Islamabad High Court in May of this year, and they considered the question of whether or not animals have legal rights. And I'll read from the judgment so that I don't get it wrong. But the answer to that was, the answer to this question, without any hesitation, is in the affirmative. Like humans, animals also have natural rights which ought to be recognised. It is the right of each animal to live in an environment that meets the latter's behavioural, social and physiological needs. And the UK will have to grapple with this issue of the natural rights of non-human animals. And I believe that lawyers in this area will play an important role in developing that law in the same way they help with the development of human rights law. Now, in March of last year, Advocates for Animals was started by two solicitors, David Thomas and Edie Bowles. This was the first firm dedicated to animal protection law, and we now have an animal rights team at the bar. So everything is in place. And as far as I'm concerned, getting back to the question of why now, the short answer is because, as far as I'm concerned, the time has definitely come.
Thank you very much. I had quite a lot I wanted to follow that up with, but maybe I'll come back to it later. I want to ask next, Samina, but first of all, I want to say I was Googling Samina and discovered, in the context of this next question, because I want to ask you whether it's significant, Samina, that this initiative is being driven by Goldsmith Chambers by 3 women. And I found 6 November this year, Chambers is delighted to have celebrated the Inspirational Women in Law Awards 2020. And of course, you wouldn't have been able to say this because you'd have to say, oh no, or you'd have to either say, oh, it was a very great honor, or I was unworthy. So I can just come out and say it. So you organised by the Next 100 Years campaign, which is interesting. Samina Iqbal, who was awarded Champion of the Year. So without saying things like, I'm unworthy, and yes, it was a great honour. Can you just tell us about that quickly? And is it significant that this initiative is being driven by 3 women?
I think, thank you. I mean, absolutely, yes. It's a sign of the times. As you know, that last year marked the centenary of the Sex Disqualification Act, which enabled women to participate in civil life, more importantly for us, the legal profession. And as you've just mentioned, the achievements of women in law have more and more been recognised by these various awards. And these ceremonies are important to mark the progress that's been made across the board. Likewise, here in Chambers, we celebrate and recognise the changing attitudes that have enabled progress to the extent that women are able to take up these leadership roles, as we have in leading these particular teams. There's still much to be done, but we're proud of what we've achieved here. Certainly, I'm much closer to home are the women that I work with, more particularly Sarah Pinder, my co-head of team, who was also nominated for an award as an outstanding returner. She certainly inspires me, and if you wouldn't mind, I would like to hand over to her to say a few words about, or to share her experiences in relation to her being able to lead our team with me, but also continue with the work-life balance.
Permission granted. I would love you to do that.
Thank you. And yes, Samina is our champion for sure. So really well deserved earlier last month. But yeah, there is still a lot to do, and it is significant. I mean, we see it higher up with the Supreme Court judges, only 2 now, maybe less in the future. So there is still a lot to do. Retention at the bar is an issue after parental leave. And so that's sort of my experience in terms of trying to juggle and trying to get that balance right. And I think what we've also seen, everybody's experience, whether you're a woman or a man with if you've got children, COVID hasn't been particularly easy either in that juggling act. So it for us, I think what we are trying to do is to remember that and to celebrate that and to pass a message on. If we can mention the childcare difficulties, the juggling acts, whatever our responsibilities are, caring responsibilities and so on, then I think we can further our profession further.
Thank you. Well, I've got 2 questions now for Tony, and the facts first about Tony. Tony did a degree in chemistry, no cheating, no going on the mobile and Googling to find out whether that's true or false. So he did a degree in chemistry is the first fact. And the second fact is he has chatted with Albie Sachs, but not in German. So those are the facts. Tony, here are your questions. I want to know, please, on behalf of our audience, now up to 123, is it significant that these initiatives have been driven in the time of COVID? And it did just strike me, and I might, if we've got time, come back to you about this, Fran, about whether it's significant in terms of the animal protection law that it's at the time of Brexit. But let's see if there's time. That's first question for you. Significance of it happening during COVID, ? And the second question, which you're only allowed 1 sentence to answer, is where do you see your chambers in 10 years' time?
Okay, thanks, Mike. Before I answer the question about COVID, can I just endorse what has been said about the earlier question, which I wasn't asked directly to answer, about the initiative being driven by 3 women. I want to say this. Sarah and Samina have been brilliant as the co-heads of this team. And indeed, they inherited it from 2 other women, from Fran and from Rita Sethi, who also did a wonderful job as the original heads and deputy head in those days of this team, which, as Sarah rightly says, has grown from nothing in a matter of 5 years or so to being, in my view, one of the, if not the top immigration chambers in the country. It's certainly in the top bracket, in my view, and I am biased, but I think it's true. I can also note, while we're saying that, that even the people who organise this conference, all this event, will note every one of them happens to be a woman. That may again be a coincidence, but I think it is very reflective of something that I'm very proud and excited about, which is the way that I do believe that women in these chambers feel very much encouraged to develop themselves and the team and events such as this tonight. So I'm sorry, that isn't really the answer to the question you wanted.
Well, allowed to say that, but I do want to know, do you think your own position is under threat? And perhaps you'll factor that in when you talk about 10 years' time.
Anybody be welcome to take over tomorrow if I have that opportunity. Can I say on the COVID, which is connected actually, I think what's happened in the last few months, it's obviously for everybody been a very difficult time. And Sarah's talked about the particular difficulties that perhaps young parents have in relation to juggling life-work balance. And others have had other difficulties, carers, looking after elderly parents, people who are sheltering for very understandable and good reasons. And we can all see that the temple now, as you all note, Mike, is pretty much deserted most of the time. And that's an extraordinary position. It feels like it's if people were to drive into the temple every day now, it's rather like in previous years driving on Christmas Day. It's almost deserted most of the time, which has a sort of ethereal beauty, but actually is exactly what we don't want. And one of the most wonderful things about this event, and more specifically, more generally, about the development of the immigration team into an expanded immigration and public law team, and the way that Fran has taken the initiative to be that person to say, well, these things are circling, but now we can really have a new team driven by her and her initiative from the conversations she's had, is very, very exciting. Because what I think it reflects is recognizing, as is true, how difficult this year has been, and turning the adversity that we've all been exposed to into a positive. And now that we can see with Chambers, thankfully, growing as it is, and we've managed to retain all our staff, which we are really delighted about, that what we can now see, obviously partly from the vaccines which are now available, and today being a very significant day, of course, in terms of the nation, in terms of the vaccine being rolled out. And it's perhaps not a coincidence, certainly not in my mind, that this Chambers, under this leadership, has now provided wonderful green shoots for the future from a difficult year. That's the first question. I don't know whether you want to go straight on to the second one.
Let's go straight on to the second one. Everyone's wondering whether you did chemistry or spoke to Albie Sachs, but take the next one.
Okay. The next one, I've only got one sentence to say, and I'll say it. It's an impossible question to answer, but I'll do my best. I think our Chambers is an ambitious, hardworking, professional, highly socially committed people who are really driven by an ethos of wanting to help those who are in more vulnerable position. And I will strongly believe that is an ethos that will thrive and grow in the years to come.
Brilliant. Well, I'm out of questions for now.
We think we have some questions for you, and I think Tony's
going to
kick off with that.
Yeah. Okay, we're going back the other way now. So the question I want to ask is really the challenges that have been for you transitioning with such a wonderful career as a barrister, and how you have found that in terms of your transition now to the full time on the High Court. What challenges has that presented, and has there been loss as far as you're concerned as well as gains?
Yeah, I think there's loss. I miss being an advocate. And I think I have to curb my enthusiasm to find ways to be an advocate. So I think that's a big challenge. I have a thing that I have in front of me when I'm sitting to tell me of which the most important part is shut up, but I'm not very good at it. And I said to counsel the day, when I was making sure everyone was on mute when they weren't speaking to me, I said, I bet you wish you could put me on mute or invite me to put myself on mute. But anyway, so I think that's a challenge. The other thing that's really interesting is the evening before a big hearing is totally different as a judge. As an advocate, I would always be just going down to the wire, staying up late, thinking about it, using every minute right up to the hearing. And you just can't do that when you're the adjudicator, because what you have to be is fresh and tuning in. And you can't do that I find on adrenaline. So I have to be disciplined to just treat the run up to hearing completely different. And there was some other stuff as well, but that's enough for now.
That's a pretty clear answer. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Samina for the next question.
Thank you. So I've got kind of two parts to my questions. And the first is, what's your favourite thing about your new job? And then what's your least favourite thing about your new job?
Okay, my least favourite thing is document management, and having, as I have for one of my 3 hearings tomorrow, 1,000-page bundle, because they just dump the stuff into an electronic bundle because no one cares how long it is because it's electronic, and then skeleton arguments that don't reference the bundle pages, and just that whole process of getting the materials into shape where you can do your job. And it's made me really grumpy and finicky, which I don't want to be. I need to change this, to sort of, and don't be grumpy. But yeah, that's, I don't like that. I don't like the energy that has to go into, can I have a reading list, please? What are you expecting me to read? That's not great at the moment. My favorite thing is I can wear my slippers, which I did at the bar as a silk. I wore my slippers in Chambers, and I do recommend it. If you think about it, why should you be in outdoor shoes when you're, just working in your room? It's crazy. So get spare slippers first thing, and get them to work as I do. Get them on. I have lava lamps, aromatherapy, the whole thing. Anything that makes you relax, I find, just makes you work better. I've only worn a tie 3 times since January, and that was when I had to sit in a divisional court on a Zoom hearing where we weren't having robes, so I had to wear a tie. I don't wear a tie. I nearly put one on today. I actually started putting one on at 5:45, and I thought, no, I can't do that. I have to be true to myself. And the fancy dress we wear, the robes, it's brilliant because it comes right up here. So you can literally, and I'm not saying whether I do, but you could literally have a T-shirt on under it, and whether you've got slippers on under the table during a remote hearing, I am not prepared to disclose. But the dress code thing is definitely my favourite thing.
Thank you. We've taken tips for now for video hearings or remote hearings, and certainly we've taken note in relation to skeleton arguments and reading lists for any future appearances before you. But I'm going to hand over to Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you. So my question is slightly more ominous, and we won't limit you to 1 sentence. I think I do speak for everyone in saying that we can listen to you for the rest of the evening. So please feel free to take your time with this one. And the question is, why is public law important?
Okay. I can do this in 1 sentence.
No.
And I can do it by quoting my boss, who's the president of the Queen's Bench Division. And don't forget, I've spent my summer sifting through stuff for a book. So according to her, the function of the court in judicial review proceedings is to ensure the scrutiny of executive action in the public interest, something which is of prime constitutional importance. I'll say it again, these are not my words. These words were spoken this year by my boss. The function of the court in judicial review proceedings is to ensure the scrutiny of executive action. So it's accountability of public authorities under the rule of law in the public interest, which is of fundamental constitutional importance. That's 1 sentence, and I am not going to attempt to improve on that.
Okay. If you didn't follow the rule, can I ask you a follow-up?
You can try.
You mentioned your handbook. It's due to be published, I think, later this month. How do you do it? Because you edit it by yourself, don't you?
Yeah, well, that's why I've got bags under my eyes. Because my summer was spent writing it, and I got back for the new term thinking that maybe it would have been a good idea to have a break. So probably lack of wisdom is the answer to that question. Right, enough about that. Let's move on.
And I'm handing over for that to Fran for the next question.
Okay, so my question, is animal rights a thing?
Is animal rights? Do you mean the legal animal rights as legal rights?
Yes.
Yes. Is it a thing? Well, look, I think I know the answer, and I am writing down my answer, and I will give you my answer. But first of all, I am going to phone a friend, and it's time for us to listen to Kevin Schneider, Executive Director of the Non-Human Rights Project. Kevin, just tell us, come off mute. Where are you?
I am in New York City, where I live.
Fantastic. And this is the miracle of having to do things on Zoom, which is horrific because we would all love to be in the same room. But if we were all in the same room, we probably wouldn't get you. So we've got you, which is fantastic. What time is it there?
It is 20 of 2.
Okay. And is it cold? It's really cold here. And
it's cold. It's like freezing. It's like could snow territory.
Yeah, mind you, as soon as it snows, within an hour, they've got it all, shunted.
It all melts pretty quick here in Manhattan for the most part. But
welcome. We're really, really pleased that you're here. I'm particularly pleased you're here because you've saved me having to answer a question. Over to you. And we're really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Okay, great. Well, that is what we do at the Non-Human Rights Project, really in a nutshell, is try to establish, have courts recognize in a full-throated way what we see as the first rights for non-human animals, that is members of species, animal species other than our own. So just a little bit of background on myself and the NHRP. Steve Wise, our founder, sends his regards. He wanted to be here today, but he had a last-minute eye surgery that was scheduled. So we got to make sure he can keep reading piles of briefs and everything else. So he sends his regards. He also did his undergrad in chemistry, so there's good company, I think, in that. So the Non-Human Rights Project, we've been around for just 2 years after Fran, took the bar in 95. We were about 96, 97. And it was not until 2013 that we filed the first habeas corpus case for a non-human animal, the first common law habeas corpus case for a non-human animal, which was every chimpanzee in the state of New York. And that was just over 7 years ago in 2013. At that time, I was, a volunteer with the project. It's been about 5 years as executive director. And for me, my whole primary motivation for going to law school was to do this kind of work because I thought that I think correctly, that the world was moving in this direction. That is beginning to recognize that we're not the only species that can have true legal rights. And so what does that mean? There's a lot of talk. Certainly I grew up on talk of animal rights, and you might be mistaken for thinking that, or not be, it wouldn't be held against you if you thought animals already have rights. But by and large, what we're talking about when we talk about that right now is welfare protections. Like in the US, here in New York, we have them at the state level. They exist at the federal level, things like the Endangered Species Act, the Animal Welfare Act. The problem with these, and I think this is really encapsulated through our active case right now, ongoing case on behalf of Happy, an elephant who's been at the Bronx Zoo here in New York for the last 40 years. She's been alone for the last 14 years. This is despite what we now know about elephants as exquisitely social beings that are way more like us than they are unlike us in this regard. And all of those kind of great laws, at the end of the day, are perfectly okay with an animal, a chimpanzee, an elephant, many others, being held in what amounts to what we would call solitary confinement. And so with that being the situation, our whole mission is, can we move beyond this? Can we get courts to recognize that, in fact, even a single non-human animal can have a legal right? And which legal right? For us, we think the relevant legal right, certainly for an animal like Happy, is the right to bodily liberty. And under the common law, that is historically protected by habeas corpus, certainly in New York and throughout the United States. And so why habeas? This seems like, I think, strikes a lot of people, certainly did in 2013, perhaps less so now. Why would you file a habeas corpus case for a non-human animal? Go to the legislature, do some of these other things, or use the existing laws that we have on the books now, because it's not impossible to take a discrete, individual animal from a bad situation to a better situation, say a sanctuary, with those laws. You can get lucky with the Endangered Species Act, or you can kind of work a settlement, but that's again, we would say very different from, does this animal actually have a legal right? And so that brings us back to the common law. We're operating under the theory that here's something that a judge actually can do. So we're coming in, as you would for a human, a single individual asking, she's held in captivity. Here are reams of scientific evidence that establish she is autonomous, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But in short, we mean by that she has a sense of herself. She has a will, and that will can be thwarted in the most visceral way by imprisoning her. And with this argument, we've, over the last 7 years, seen marked progress. As you can imagine, at first, and actually we were surprised the very first time we filed in 2013 for a chimpanzee named Tommy. And for folks who want to see a little more background on this in a nice visual form, there's an HBO documentary called Unlocking the Cage. The BBC was involved with it, Arte France, a bunch of other folks. So it's been out there for a few years now, and you can still find it on HBO and other places. And that follows us into the courtroom on these very first attempts. The first time we were in an appeals court in 2014, they told us non-human animals cannot have legal rights, cannot be legal persons. That is, they can't even have the capacity for a legal right because they can't take on duties and responsibilities. So that's been one of the first roadblocks that we ran into in the courts was, well, they can't have rights. They might be autonomous. They might be all these other things, but they're not the kinds of beings that can take on duties and responsibilities. But it turns out what the courts really mean by that is, in a kind of roundabout way, they're simply not human. Because for one thing, there are many human beings that don't and can never shoulder duties and responsibilities. We certainly don't strip them of their rights, and rightly so. But also there are myriad problems with the idea that the social contract is what creates legal rights for humans or for animals or for anybody. We probably don't have a whole lot of time to go into that, but for folks that are interested, it's all over our briefs, which, everything that we file or gets filed in our cases goes directly up on our website, because we think one of the most important things we're doing is educating and, of course, advocating in court, but really trying to move the needle in a broader public conversation in the media and legislatures and other courts that aren't hearing actively our cases, but are still reading about them and thinking about them. And so all that's to say, what has happened so far? Well, we haven't yet got a court to actually declare this animal has a right to bodily liberty because of habeas corpus. But what we have done is kind of broken through that first door. We've gotten now 2 courts in New York to issue the order to show cause. Of course, we don't actually ask the courts to, as sometimes our opponents suggest, haul the animals into court. We're not asking an elephant to go into court, a chimpanzee. That's why we bring it by an order to show cause. So that's perfectly, legitimate way to bring up this issue. And for, 2 times now, we've had courts actually issue that. And what that means is, like a human petitioner, they're essentially assuming without deciding that this chimpanzee, this elephant, could be a person, could have the right to bodily liberty. And when I say person, I really just mean for that sole right to bodily liberty. And there's all kinds of, I think, interesting and I would say persuasive case law and history that makes pretty clear, unlike what we got from a question from a judge just 2 weeks ago in an appeals court in New York, if you grant habeas for Happy, that does not mean that she can go out and then vote or drive or marry or do all these other things. It's not like a kind of one size fits all, the same way it isn't for humans. Different humans may have different rights and under different circumstances. And so 2 times now, we've gotten through that first step. And right now in Happy's case, which is ongoing, we're now, like I said, we just argued 2 weeks ago, and we're waiting for a decision hopefully in about a month or a month and a half, which will then take right up to the Court of Appeals. And the Court of Appeals is extra significant. Not only is it the highest court in New York, we have this weird thing in New York where we call the trial court the Supreme Court, and then the intermediate courts are appellate divisions, and then the highest court is the Court of Appeals. So we have this, it's really confusing as hell, especially when you're, taking the bar exam and trying to figure out what all these things are. But suffice to say, the Court of Appeals is where, the real action is, because they can cut through a lot of this and, make a determination, we would hope, in our favor. And one source of optimism there is a sitting judge right there named Eugene Fahey. In 2018, he issued a concurring opinion in one of our chimpanzee habeas cases, and the High Court in that instance denied further review, as they do in like 95% of the cases that people try to bring before them, much like our Supreme Court, federal Supreme Court. They don't hear most of the cases that try to get up there. But he felt strong enough about it that he issued a concurring opinion himself in which he said, this issue has been bothering me for several years. This is the refusal for courts like us to take on this question is a refusal to confront what he called a manifest injustice. He, stated without hesitation that this duties and responsibilities social contract standard is not the way that we partition rights or think about rights. It's not what he calls a simple kind of either or proposition. And he ended it by saying that, it may be arguable that whether a chimpanzee is a person, but she's certainly not a thing. And so that's beautiful. Of course, the problem with that is we're working against a backdrop that, as we see it, you can be a thing or you can be a person. And of course, there's a lot of gray area and there's a lot of nuance in there. But broadly speaking, the judges, I think, are naturally uncomfortable saying, yeah, you're a thing, this exquisitely complex being who, that, again, is not like a moral characteristic. We don't argue that their autonomy or their, intelligence is, the reason why they should have rights, but we argue that it's a sufficient basis. If we can present to you an individual that is autonomous, that should be enough, in essence, for at least this individual to cross through the threshold and be recognized as a person. I'm sorry, I got someone knocking at my door. Just 1 second.
It's almost certainly somebody who needs the help of the project, so it'll be really important. Just while we're waiting for, Kevin's back.
Very conscious. Sorry about that. He was a very insistent delivery person. So, so we just had this hearing. For folks that are interested, I can share a YouTube link. You can see how fun it is to be. And, you talk about virtual hearings. The one kind of silver lining for us in the whole process was, the courts have not let cameras in. We've been desperate to try to get these things filmed and try to disseminate them. But now in the COVID era, they're doing things on Zoom or Microsoft Teams. And we're actually able to share that. It's on YouTube. The court has a YouTube. So folks can, see this. But, in a broader sense, it's not just, I think you can get kind of bogged down in these ideas, habeas and personhood. I think the broader picture, we have to, as lawyers, take on this very technical argument. But what we've seen, certainly in our hope and goal, has been to take that kind of, certainly something like the Fahey opinion. We got a really good trial court opinion in Happy's case where the judge said, regrettably, she was bound to rule against us because of the duties and responsibilities precedent. She said, certainly, Happy would be much better off in a sanctuary. She's maybe entitled to liberty. She's the kind of being who may have dignity, which is a whole other interesting kind of legal concept. And when it comes to what's the foundation for rights, where do rights come from? And even more exciting, I think, is to see the work that we're doing start to be cited. For example, in the Islamabad case, Pakistan, the judge there cited our work, and we've now developed a correspondence with that judge and his clerk because he's very supportive of what we're doing. And I thought it was very noteworthy that he spent a lot of time, in his opinion, citing directly from the Quran and making a very, religious, social, cultural. He even started the opinion by talking about COVID and how it's a sign to us, a kind of screaming red signal, like the record button here, that something's going wrong. The way that we relate to the rest of the planet is really screwed up. And I like to think that a big part of that is addressing, the legal. It's certainly not everything. If we, personhood for, a handful of species at the outset, but I think it really forms the conversation in a much more kind of detailed way, because a big part of what we're saying is that, yes, there are animal rights, there should be, but we need to embrace this idea of really looking at species by species or at least breaking them up into kind of different groups, because this idea that every species in every instance is going to have the same needs, same interests, the same kind of legal relationship to humans, I think is not the best starting place. I think if we kind of embrace the complexity and even do something that on its face can look like a rather narrow case, I think the process of that allows us to engage the judicial mind a little bit more. And since we have a judicial mind, I would love to hear if any of this sticks or if it compels. So I think, that's basically what I wanted to talk about. I hope that's what folks had in mind. And, you can follow us, nonhumanrights.org. We love to hear from folks. And we've been working internationally ourselves for years now. It's now starting to really shape up and come to fruition. In particular, in Israel, we've been working with a team of lawyers there who want to essentially do the same thing, file a habeas corpus petition, make a lot of the same kind of arguments. We're also working with lawyers in India and throughout Europe and parts of Asia and Latin America. And that's indeed where some of the best cases have come from. You've already had courts in Argentina faced with habeas corpus petitions for a chimpanzee, actually issue it, rule that the chimpanzee was a person entitled to this liberty, and that individual, that's Cecilia, now lives at a sanctuary. Sandra is another example, although it's a little more of a gray area, whether she was a person, legally speaking, but suffice to say, this is an argument that judges around the world outside the US are, I think, already accepting.
Thank you so much. And again, I will say that it is COVID that has meant that we've had to be online, but which has brought you to us for this event. I've got a question for you, and I want to ask Fran the question I had for her. I'm going to be asking Fran about Brexit and whether in the legislative instruments that protect animals, what's the sort of Brexit dynamic from her perspective on the before and the after and the particular timing. But my question for you, Kevin, if you don't mind, is I wanted to just ask you to what extent you see the emphasis on being on the kind of law that legislators produce, because that's a whole different kind of legal protection that's obviously important. And then you've talked a lot about the courts and the common law and protection there. Are you having to hang your arguments on existing instruments? Do you also have a sort of legal policy and legislative initiatives side to the work you're doing, or is that being done by other people?
So historically, we've been, a group of lawyers trying to pursue this narrow, but we think very kind of deep argument over whether any non-human can have this kind of right to bodily liberty. But over, it's been very much a conscious part of the plan to have that form a foundation for public education, but also, like you said, legislative work. So we've begun that process. We had a law review article that we put out a few years back that kind of serves as a basis for it, but it basically is starting from the lowest level, the municipal level. We've been working in Los Angeles on a bill that would actually recognize one or more species as having a right to bodily liberty within the city, which we think kind of sparks all kinds of interesting conversations. But at the other end of the spectrum, so to speak, on the federal level, we don't, push there. That's not where our efforts really are now. But we know folks there, elected officials and other staffers who follow what we're doing and find it very interesting and see real potential, I think, in actually starting to write some of this into law. And I think if you watch the happy argument that we just had, or the argument for happy, it wasn't necessarily a happy argument, whatever that is. But you can see the judges clearly sympathetic, but also, I would say, almost scared because of worrying, what does this mean? If we grant this one right for this one individual, what next? The kind of classic slippery slope situation. And on that grounds, I think a lot of the judges we've been in front of have felt, take this to the legislature. We're not saying this is a bad thing necessarily what you're trying to do, but we don't feel comfortable doing it.
Thank you very much. Let me then bring in Fran. Fran, do you want to comment on that thing about EU legislation that has been in the animal protection area or overlapped with it and the implications for Brexit? I realise that could be a whole evening in and of itself.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, I think that one of the problems with Brexit is who knows what's going to happen. But I think one of the issues we've got with Brexit is sentience and getting that into UK law, it not being transposed from EU law. There was a animal welfare, I think it was sentience and sentencing bill, but unfortunately what happened was the sentience bit got cut from the sentencing bill. And so although the sentencing bill is going ahead, there's the sentience bill has basically got nowhere. So I think that's one of our first challenges.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Fran. I'm going to shut up for a bit more. I promise I will come back to Fran's question and do a bit of a sweep up, but I think over to
Thank you, everyone. And just to, I suppose, show you a little bit more about ourselves and our award-winning barristers in chambers with all the work that we do. Here's something that Jane has prepared.
Thank you, everyone. I'm now going to hand over to Mike again so he can do a wrap-up of this evening's discussions.
Thank you all very much for that. Look, I've already told you that I don't work the evening before court, so I'm not going to directly answer Fran's question because that would involve me using my judicial mind in a completely inappropriate way. So let me just do two things. First of all, I want to do what you've all been waiting for. The 118 people, thank you so much, who have stayed with us, notwithstanding that gratuitous self-publicity that we just enjoyed. But here then are the facts. Samina did not skydive over a glacier in New Zealand, but did backpack in Laos. Sarah did chat in German with Lewis Hamilton, and he was very impressed. I don't know why you did that, Sarah, but she was not born in South Africa. Tony did not do a degree in chemistry. So, Kevin, we don't have that link after all, sadly, but he did chat with Albie Sachs. And Fran did not try to climb Everest. She did have a client who was a chimpanzee. So here's what I'm going to do just to respond to the question that you raised about animal rights as a thing in law, and what Kevin said and what we've heard about the Islamabad court and what we heard about the judge who was bothered and gave the concurring opinion. So let me just float a thought for you to consider. If you project back in history to moments where things that were mainstream and acceptable and became in later decades and centuries just truly alarming, and you'd be able to think of examples immediately. But we were talking earlier about animals as a thing. Well, how about people as a thing, as being owned? Or women not being able to vote, or children being beaten, just to take examples, and you'll be able to come up with 10 more. And then you project forward to see what happened about that and what happened about all of that under the law. I think it is worth always projecting back to the time when it turned, and imagine yourself being in that world and ask yourself whether you would have seen it, where you would have been on the map when that was happening, because it's much easier when it's all seen decades and centuries on. And sometimes it is only a relatively short time on. Take beating children as an example of that. And so you know what I'm going to say now, which is now project forward, not the 10 years I asked Tony about, but perhaps a bit longer, and then look back. And will it have been the case that there were things that just weren't spotted, or some people spotted, and something that turned? And if you think, well, inevitably there will be things of that kind, what are they? And where are you on that map? And I'm not going to answer. I'm just going to say, I think that is a relevant thought to float in the context of Fran's question. I will say no more than that. So I've given you the secrets, and you've all stayed on to hear them. That's what I'm going to say by way of sweep up. Thank you for having me. Kevin, thank you for joining us. And I'm going to hand back over to Tony, who's going to wrap up the evening.
Thank you, Mike. Of course, in all our cases, I think the things that were not true about us were partly true. So, Kevin, I did start doing a chemistry degree. So now we're going to introduce a video. I have to say, this is coming as a surprise to me too. I haven't seen this video myself, so I come to it as fresh as I think nearly everybody who's going to be watching, and I hope you find it of interest.
I declare my mum is allowed to continue her job in the Justice League. Dismiss. They were the ones that were cleaning up the streets when no one else would. They're the ones keeping you safe in your neighbourhood.
The real MVP, it's got to be a barrister. The one's fighting when you're all alone. Kevin McAllister, working day and night to win case after case. You're vulnerable, important, not a number in a database. When you're a barrister, they never want to lose. But win or lose, they keep their virtues.
What does justice mean to you?
Human rights, fairness, equality.
Smart. Fairness. Resourceful. Meticulous. Judicious. Justice. Inspirational.
So, what does it mean to get into public law? Well, it means long hours, lots of reading, and sometimes complex and difficult cases.
You can represent people in courts that are far less depressing than this one.
It is important to ensure that those that are the most vulnerable in our society have access to justice to preserve and protect their individual rights.
It's not just each playground that has its bullies, but the whole planet, from local decision-making to the heart of central government and beyond.
The biggest challenge in being a public law lawyer is the exhaustion that sometimes comes when challenging powerful public bodies and sometimes dealing with their devious tactics.
Barristers at Goldsmith Chambers are committed to providing the best possible legal representation to individuals in those challenges. We're here to help you every step of the way.
Barristers are the W in Wakanda. They enable our ladies to be able to create their own destiny.
Being a barrister to me is, I regard as a wonderful privilege,
an opportunity to represent those who may not be in a position to properly and ably represent themselves in relation to a court of law on an issue where they are feeling nervous or fearful of the legal establishment and the circumstances in which they face.
So being public lawyer for me means being like an inspector, being a checks and balance of the system.
Being a barrister means that you can make a difference every single day.
Representing people as a barrister is a privilege. You're often dealing with people who are experiencing one of the most stressful times in their lives.
With the law, you are able to navigate in the forever changing and dynamic legal system.
Law means providing access to justice wherever and whatever the conditions.
The thing about injustice is you've got to fight it, and we're here to help you with that.
Getting legal aid in place for urgent cases is the biggest challenge for public law lawyers.
I was called to the bar quite late in life, and I will never forget on call night. My late mum was so proud, and she said to me, "You were difficult to have, you've been difficult all your life. At least now you found a way of making money out of being difficult."
In the words of Emmeline Pankhurst, but in the context of our job, we try to free half the human race so that they can help free the other half. And for us, that is those whose rights need protecting.
And with inspiration from another great mind, Rosalind Yallow, we cannot expect in the immediate future that all will achieve full equality of opportunity. But we must believe in ourselves, or no one else will believe in us.
So, we're here to get the job done.
My name is Grace Ann Kelly. I'm 10 years old and I'm the youngest justice campaigner in the world. As a child of a Commonwealth veteran who served in the British Army, I found out that my father and his colleagues do not get an automatic right to live in the UK and have to pay thousands of pounds to be a citizen, which I think is morally wrong. This is why I speak out about this unfair treatment.
As a public law barrister, I work to ensure that the rights and interests of all animals on this planet, both human and non-human, are protected.
We need specialist animal rights lawyers because animals are vulnerable, but they're also voiceless.
It is incredibly important that there are specialist animal lawyers. Historically, animal law has been led by volunteers and those offering pro bono support on the side of their main practice area. However, it's only through establishing animal law as a distinct and professional field that animals can have their protections adequately enforced. This would of course be the case in any area of law that affected humans, whether that be commercial, criminal or property. What you see there are specialist lawyers representing the interests of their clients. And it's an injustice that for so long, animals have not had the same safeguards.
Philip Woolen, the former Vice President of Citibank, has described animal rights as the greatest social justice issue since the abolition of slavery. And I tend to agree with him. For me, social justice is about equality of consideration, regardless of nationality or ethnicity or gender or species. And I reject those who say we have to deal with the human problems first. We have very real human problems, because actually there's an interconnectedness between issues that relate to animals and humans. Economic, environmental, health, exploitation of resources, exploitation of labour. These are all very interconnected issues. By taking animals out of the equation, by not giving them equal moral consideration, we're doing a disservice to humans and to animals.
Hi, many congratulations to Goldsmith on your new unit. It is gratifying to see further recognition of animal law as an important, discrete legal discipline, not a subset, say, of environmental law. This underlines that not only is this an area of great ethical importance, but also an intellectually challenging, wide-ranging, international, domestic, and above all, satisfying area of practice. We at Advocates for Animals look forward to working closely with our friends at Goldsmith for our mutual NGO clients, and in particular for all the animals who fare so badly at the hands of humankind. So all the very best with your endeavour.
think this launch is fantastic news for the animal law community. It shows how animal law is a serious area of practice, and it will help encourage more critical thinking in the legal community more generally about the laws that regulate our use of animals, and hopefully it will encourage more creative thinking by some of the best legal minds about what laws that better protect animals would look like.
So thank you to the barristers and solicitors. The end.
Well, I hope you found it as wonderful and as inspiring as I did, coming to this cold. I just thought it was so wonderful and warm and reflective of what this whole event has been about. I just want to say a couple of thank yous. Mike, your warmth, your humour, your integrity has just shone through. I think it would be quite fun to appear in front of you, though quite intimidating too. But if you think at the time now you're going to have to retire one day now, you want to become a compere afterwards, I think you do a pretty good job. And I want to say a big thank you also to Kevin for stepping in at short notice, for giving us such a fascinating, instructive talk. You are doing trailblazing work, and we hope very much that we can join you as far as we can in similar work here. And can I most of all thank absolutely everybody for coming tonight. We've really enjoyed sharing this evening with you, and we hope you have a lovely evening. And once again, thanks to everyone for setting up and organising the event. And I hope you've all had an enjoyable time listening and watching. Thank you.